So fantastic to be here at Creative Mornings. What a great idea and what a great bunch. I'm hoping there's several non-architects. How many here are architects? Okay. We tend to stick together as a group. But thank you all as architects for coming here to listen to me this morning, on this lovely cold Saturday morning. I've actually pitched this talk to appeal a little more to non-architects, hoping that we can pitch ourselves a bit as a profession that I think is just not holding its weight in the society we are in today. And perhaps that's why this little pitch this morning. My greatest take on architecture is that, as architects we tell stories. And I love the fact that we are able to tell stories that stay there for 2.5 millennium, like 2,500 BC, and we still have buildings from there that tell amazing stories. We tell stories of love, hate, passion, power, politics, economics, all of it we're able to tell, and it stands there in the public realm for eras to come. And therefore I often wonder, how is it that that language that we speak is not being read adequately? I'm going to start with this wonderful image of Mohenjo-Daro, and to me it's amazing that just the footings of a building can tell us about an entire civilization. You go on to something like Sanchi Stupa, which is a little more literal, speaks about a religion, the simplicity of the religion, but with it, what's beautiful about the Sanchi Stupa, if anybody's been there, there's what is called a comic strip in stone, which is an entire society and its stories sit there in all those toranas. So it's a little more literal, but still telling a story. The story of the Hindu temple, amazing in terms of both the very literal, figurative stuff that we all know about, Khajuraho being the most talked about example, but of course there's so much else that a temple tells us. Even the whole transition that a temple affords us from reality, which is the outside world, through the Ardha Mandapa, through a mandapa, going into a garbhagriha being that amazing space where you're supposed to commune with spirituality. And how that little bit of darkness with just the diya of light is created in that garbhagriha. Another wonderful example from the past that I love to visit and to talk about are the stepwells of India. And the reason, of course the stepwells are extremely photogenic and beautiful to look at, but to me the very fact that there is a power in bringing people together to bring out water is such a powerful idea, that there can be public spaces. For example, if you think of the village tap or the tap in the slum, if it was beautiful, if it was a public space, can you imagine how powerful particularly women could become? They could actually sit around and chat while filling water instead of the long lines where squabbling happens. The power of something like Fatehpur Sikri. Fatehpur Sikri to me speaks about a tolerant monarch who was able to imbibe varied different architectural styles and actually look at how wind and water can play a huge role in our lives. I love the imagery, the gentleness, the fact that there is a huge inside out with Fatehpur Sikri, where walking in those plazas is as wonderful as being in the semi-open spaces or in the very kind of cloistered chambers of the king. And then a huge expression of political power, and yet done with such extreme finesse is VT Station, relevant till today in terms of the grandeur of its statement. beautifully finished. One has to just go into the ticketing office at the ground level to realize that something as mundane as ticketing can be a very evocatively beautiful space. And this, according to me, is something very much at the heart of a huge controversy right now. Lutyens Delhi, a grand imperial statement made by an architect who professed that he actually did not like Indian architecture, but was able to imbibe several elements of Indian architecture into a rather grandiose scheme that over time, over the last 70 odd years that we've had this, has become a symbol of what is India, what is power in India, and it has become fairly dear to people. To me, this is another fantastic example of how a newly found democracy was struggling to find expression, was struggling to find how do you express democracy after colonialism, imperialism, monarchy. How do you express democracy? And Chandigarh, according to me, is just, you may love it, you may hate it, but it's just one such kind of experiment in expressing democracy through the idea of large plazas, the Pilates that float and allow people to walk through. And here again, another search for democracy. I find a lot of these buildings were a nation in search for an idiom that is speaking about its past as well as speaking about where it stands today. So Louis Kahn's IIM Ahmedabad, built with very humble brick, and yet what has he converted brick into? A very formal institution, and institution building was the name of the game at the time, and still Louis Kahn has managed to create an idiom that is very inside out, creates several spaces that students can gather in, meet in, as you can see right here. And the same lowly brick was taken by Laurie Baker and used in a completely different idiom, used to create middle-class housing, used to create very, very nature-friendly, environmentally friendly homes, lattices or jalis through which air and ventilation could move, and could actually afford a middle-class person an inexpensive but very beautiful, very natural home. And here again, to me, is this amazing expression of democracy in the 1990s. 1990 was that amazing year when the world changed, when globalization happened actually across the world, when USSR and the United States kind of converged, in a handshake by Mikhail Gorbachev on Fifth Avenue in New York, when Perestroika happened, when the entire Eastern Bloc kind of fell, more than fell, liberated itself. And in India, it was a time of globalization when our economy kind of opened up to the global economy. And I think it had several repercussions. The repercussions were more entrepreneurship. The repercussions were looking for symbols that were still Indian but global in nature. And our office actually started roughly in 1990. So interestingly, this year we'll be 30 years, but this is an image of several of us in the office at one of the buildings we've built. And I think we have kind of, in the last 30 years, created a few words that tend to define us. Crafted has been one of the most important words, and by crafted, we don't simply mean using human hand. We do mean solving each problem innovatively, not looking at a bunch of problems and clubbing them together with one solution, which is so often what happens and creates often alienated boxes. What we are saying is that every little aspect of a building and a person's life needs to be looked at, addressed, and a solution can be crafted towards it. Another word that we love is contextual, and I'm always told by my daughter, who some of you here know, that nobody understands this word, Mama, stop using it. By contextual, we're simply talking about actually building with the climate that one encounters in all the various different corners of India, and working very much with the cultural history of those little areas that we build in. And most of all, despite all the cultural histories that we're constantly trying to portray and speak about, we are very contemporary. We are attempting to speak a language that the society of today, reflect what the society of today is speaking about, and ensure that we speak to people that are of today. A very interesting aspect of architecture that I wanted to speak about, that I'm not sure a lot of other disciplines are have this as their fundamental encounter. For us, we're very conscious of this kind of multi-headed hydra that is our client. We have the individual owner or patron who hires us. We very much have the user whose needs need to be very well understood. And then we have the understanding that there is a larger society out there that we're catering to. Our work is going to sit there for the next 100 years, hope maybe not the next 2,500, as we've seen in some of the slides behind us. So what is the language that we want to speak to the society of the next 100 years? The other interesting aspect of architecture that I find absolutely fascinating is the collaboration. Here I've put us in the center typically, but this little diagram can be with any one of these stakeholders in the center, where we're collaborating with multiple clients, multiple consultants, multiple contractors, multiple craftspeople, and what we're thinking about needs to be not just communicated but accepted and enjoyed all the way down till that last craftsperson. Otherwise, you will see struggle. So this to us is one of the most important aspects of building a building. It's, that whole idea of the master architect is long gone. It's a huge collaboration that produces these buildings, and how we maintain the relationships and the communication between all these collaborations is what finally, according to me, determines the end product, determines how successful a building is going to be. Very early in my career, it was, I think, in the 1990s, we had just started, but mostly what I was able to do was in a bedroom, I was getting a few interiors to design. And fortunately, the way our practice got built was the initial clients who gave us interiors kept growing through this wonderful phase of entrepreneurship in the 90s. And we did project after project for our very first clients. And as they grew, we built initially an office for them in Mumbai, then a factory in an outlying city, then a house for them somewhere else, and then maybe their corporate office building. So it was a very interesting growth process. But the reason I'm showing Ayush Shakti is because it was a very early building, and perhaps my second building. The first one was a factory in Wada. It was a rice mill. And this was really the Ayurvedic doctor that I used to go to, who had a very narrow plot of land in Kandivli, a suburb in Mumbai. Everybody knows Kandivli. I say this because I often speak at other cities. And it was a really 16-meter wide, very narrow plot. And, considering Mumbai's bylaws, a whole world of Ayurveda had to fit into this. This was a husband and wife entrepreneurship, Ayurvedic doctors, really wanting to express what they do. They wanted people to understand that Ayurveda is closer to nature, it's an old Indian science. How do we reflect all of this in this building? And the building was, what we could really build was a box, because this is the way you build in Mumbai. And here are some of the solutions that we found to this box that we were expected to build. We really played with climate here and ensured that the east was very open. We really played with the 10% balconies that are permitted under the bylaws of Mumbai, that were permitted in the bylaws of Mumbai. I can do an entire talk on this issue. That it's part of what is called fungible FSI now. But anyway, so balconies are according to me one of the lungs of Mumbai. We were also in a stage where terraces were permitted, so you could step the building back and create terraces, and that's what you see right here. Terraces and balconies, little jharokas. This is how we actually made that box very, very humane and very, very inhabitable. So you can see here what we did with the balconies. These doctors had 350 patients every hour. They had loads of people waiting to occupy these spaces. So we created these little waiting rooms here. All the wood you see has come out of the old wood. There are these old wood warehouses in Ahmedabad. So it's all reused wood. And the vocabulary of the building is about ensuring, that's the other wonderful thing, the chajjas. I can't imagine when we decided that horizontal chajjas should work in Mumbai. Sloping chajjas for rain like this is extremely important. So we created this vocabulary of multiple openings and spaces. You see right here the corridors where people can still sit, as well as how the building stepped back and created this lovely terrace for people to spill out onto. Another project that has been very, very dear to our hearts, has won us a lot of awards, but most importantly has won us some great comments from the client, is this factory in Karur. Karur is a little town in South India, and it is the hotbed of textiles, home textiles that all get kind of spun in homes in Karur and then brought to these large factories where checking and quality check and packing happen, and then it goes out into the big bad world and goes to the Pier 1 imports and all the interesting stores. You see the process right here. The stuff comes into the factory in bullock carts, gets processed, packed, and goes out into fancy stores all over the world. And what we found in Karur was that Aluko bond and glass had hit Karur like it's hit most of India in a big way. And people were building these wonderful little structures which had to be air conditioned because there wasn't enough ventilation. They love to use glass. There are even some with Doric and ionic columns which you don't see here. And we were a bit appalled when we did our recce of Karur, and we decided to walk around, understand the local vocabularies, and realize that beautiful gable walls, courtyards, verandas, and most importantly, there was a stone quarrying space in the area. So we sketched this building, which is replete with courtyards. It's got a stone facade using the stone from the local area and kind of reigniting the passion of the craftsmen in building stone walls. And we created these barrel vaulted roofs because Karur is fairly close to the equator, and therefore north and south light were equally viable. And there's a later slide, I think, that shows what happens with these roofs. But really, courtyards was the name of the game. And using these courtyards that face the west, we were able to filter the winds, filter the hot air, create the convection currents that are needed to ensure that spaces remain extremely cool. And this is therefore a factory that has absolutely no air conditioning. We worked with a lot of craftspeople. The doors are all made out of regular local wood and stitched together by a Dindigul locksmith who actually came and created this hardware, and therefore you don't need frames. You can actually pivot these doors, which is, a lot of us in old houses have seen how this works. The flooring was Chettinad tiles Chettinad is not far away from Karur, and if anybody hasn't been to Chettinad, I mean, the homes are beautiful, but go there and see the technology of creating the most wonderful cement tiles in that beautiful Geru color by local craftspeople, the simplest way possible, under thatched roofs. I have them in my house and they've lasted 20 years. To me, the Karur factory really was about an amazing entrepreneur. This is a woman with whom we've done 11 projects and was really open to the idea of being very local, understanding local histories. And for us, it was an experiment that actually worked to be able to show that even for a prototype like a factory, one can actually use craft and history to make an environment far more comfortable. This is one of those quirky projects that people enjoy, and I think as an office we had a lot of fun doing. It was hard work, but it started with this real ideas of standing at site, picking up these leaves, thinking that Alibag is a space of gentle hills and coconut trees. Why do we need to build orthogonally in this kind of atmosphere? So we picked up the leaves, and on the boat ride back, I put the leaves together and created this little site plan. And then when we were back in the office, we realized that the leaf is actually a very interesting form for a rainy climate like Alibag. The leaf can dip and it can create, wonderful shade for rain, and it can rise up in the north and bring in a lot of light. In order to not be gimmicky, one of the most interesting things we did was stuck with a very, very simple palette of materials. It's exposed concrete, it's steel, and it's Kota stone. So here you see we found this local contractor. You can only use local contractors in Alibag. Here you see the steel columns filled with concrete, exposed, just lacquered over with a PU finish. And you see how the bedrooms, etc., function. A lot of light and a lot of openness. And we really needed to ensure that there was no lighting piercing those ceilings. So all the lights come from the floor or to some extent from the walls. And all the rooms are separate, and the existing trees created the courtyard. So movement from one space to another is through the outdoors. According to me, these again, Fatehpur Sikri, all our older projects use the outdoors in this manner, and we really didn't see the need to become monolithic. Another project that we have really enjoyed is this Nirvana film studio, and again an example of a great collaboration with a client who produces some of the best ad films in the country. So they came to us with this little site in Bangalore, small site facing west and south. And what do you do when you're in a very tight urban environment where you literally have to optimize every square inch? I don't want anybody to believe that we only build in Alibag where there's an acre of land. We do build in these very, very small, tight situations. And even in this situation, we needed to create something that was out of the box, though we were creating a box. And what we also really wanted was the ability to create a courtyard, some kind of space that would allow people to rest, breathe, communicate, have meetings. So very interestingly, the courtyard in this project became the staircase. Since the only thing in a building like this that you can play with when you want to optimize every square inch is that mode of communicating up and down between the ground plus 3 floors. And we wrapped our spaces around the staircase. And the staircase really brought in the wind, brought in the light, brought in the communication. And it has a skylight right at the top through which light percolates all the way down. And on both sides of the staircase, there's openings so that the wind comes in. And then we also did an interesting thing. We kind of interchanged what is wall and what is window. So walls are porous, and glass and windows are movable and made out of acrylic polymer. Those are those white louvers that you see. And here you see the core, the staircase with its structural member cutting right through, and the spaces kind of around it, and these little jharoka-like benches that look down into the staircase. And I've literally seen meetings happening on this staircase. Somebody shouting an idea out from the top, somebody serenely sitting on a bench, a bunch of people on a staircase, and to the left. This building uses literally no kind of energy through the day, no lighting devices or ventilation devices other than these louvers, and little rest spots, as you see here, a little terraces. I mean, Nirvana Films was really the story of a wonderful creative entrepreneur, the story of Bangalore, the possibilities of working in great climate, the possibility of working when, creative minds are really so much more open, and therefore they allowed us the ability to build a building like this. The next project I'm going to show you is about, again, a set of creative individuals who hired us to build an automobile design studio. Mahindra & Mahindra has a 64-acre campus in Kandivli, and the campus is full of these sheds. Automobiles are being rolled out even yet as we speak in these sheds. And the automobile design studio is a very interesting facility where cars are styled. And it's top secret because nobody wants, a competitor to know what the next model is that's going to come out. So it's top secret, and these designers were very keen to get, despite being in these industrial sheds, they wanted a cutting-edge design studio. For us, the most interesting aspect of doing a cutting-edge design studio like this was the fact that, one, we were working within an existing idiom of industrial sheds. We could build a little more, but basically we had to rework these sheds. And the other interesting aspect of it is that in this kind of project, the car is the protagonist. And what we could be was a neutral backdrop to this car. So how are you going to be a neutral backdrop and still be, cutting edge design and inspire these wonderful people? Mahindra & Mahindra stood for, we looked at all their ad campaigns, and they stood for rugged, dependable, industrial. Their Scorpio was so were a lot of their other cars. And those are the stories we attempted to express in what we've done here. This is really where the cars are styled, and despite a number of requirements, a certain kind of lighting, a certain kind of air conditioning, what we've done is created this very neutral gray backdrop, and a very kind of used a lot of metal. We loved the idea of using metal in this project because metal is what cars use, as well as metal is a great craftsmanship that the city embodies. We were able to find very interesting craftspeople who helped us create, this cotton steel wall, which forms the backdrop for a beautiful concrete staircase. Once again, small spiral staircases literally crafted together like you would a necklace, all the steps around a single pole. And these old doors that exist in a factory area that we kind of reimagined as steel doors with wood, using great hardware, and making sure therefore that the idea of a factory door could be very, very interesting and inspiring. This is, what inspired us, the way this factory worked. These were some of the elements that go together in creating these cars. The last project I'm going to show you today is something that was very, it's a series of projects. I'm only going to show you one out of the whole series. A client came to us saying that they wanted to build hotels for religious tourism. And they were very keen. They had 3 or 4 properties all over the country, and they said, just give us a cookie cutter design and we'll plonk it all over the country. For us, this was complete anathema, and we said, look, just hire us to do a design consultancy for the first 2 or 3, and we'll show you what can be done with this idea, and then you decide whether you want to put cookie cutter or various different designs. We did a design for Tirupati, for Rishikesh, and for Bodh Gaya, and all three have very, very different religious idols that are being worshipped in that area, very different climates, very different cultural histories, so to say, very different roots, to use the right word for today. This is what we call the Dashavatar Hotel, since the worship in Tirupati is of the Lord Balaji or Vishnu, and the 10 avatars of Vishnu have always been very evocative for us, and the idea that the evolution of man can be seen through the 10 avatars of Vishnu. But what we actually did is used the plan of the Hindu temple, the very introverted orthogonal plan of the Hindu temple, to design this hotel, and use the mandapa that is often in a large water body outside a Hindu temple, and developed this as the architectural vocabulary. And the idea was to really create something that felt in the hustle bustle of Tirupati. We wanted this to become an oasis that you come back to, an oasis that represents the worship of Lord Vishnu as well as represents divinity and peace. And it's a very contemporary kind of translation of several things. The center is the Lotus, the Lotus Cafe, and interpreted the way we have. And what we also did was used each individual public space as one of the to be interpreted as one of the avatars of Vishnu. And you can see how that's done here. So this was the Krishna restaurant, very blue in nature, and one can tell why, using the flutes, using the handis, the dahi handis, and the colors of Holi. So all of this, and I'm going to bring us with a bang right back to 2020, and this is the view outside my window at work. And I started this conversation by saying architecture speaks. It tells us stories. I love this image for multiple reasons. I feel there are so many stories that are being told right here. One of the stories to me is a story of pluralism, of multiple building types coexisting in one landscape, and something that I really enjoy. But it's also a story of inequality. It's also a story of extreme struggle. And the struggle that I see here is when you look at some of these buildings and you look at people creating little chajjas of their own, creating, pasting tar onto the facade of their building, trying to make up for the lack of climatic integration into their architecture. People creating little decorative elements to make up for what modernism has stolen from them. We've created these machines, these boxes, and expect people to live in them. My hope, of course, for the future resides in these three words: equality, pluralism, and sustainability. And I do hope that the stories that architects tell in the future and today will actually reflect these three words. Thank you.